Khenpo, hello. I'm a Chinese language teacher at the Center for Modern East Asian Studies. I'd like to ask a very simple question, perhaps a bit naive. You just mentioned about equality, the culling of birds during bird flu outbreaks. Actually, I feel that sometimes, isn't this also a kind of, how should we handle this issue? And if we don't cull them, how can we maintain equality while also dealing with this problem? Is there a better way, or how should we? I feel it might be somewhat difficult at times.
If we see life as something that is indeed very precious, then not only is human life precious, but so is the life of birds and animals. Their lives are just as valuable as human lives. For example, when people get avian flu, when it spreads from person to person, this whole group of people would be killed. What kind of logic is that? In fact, if we look at it from the highest perspective and see that the lives of these animals are the same as human lives, then in order to prevent some people from being infected, it would be unreasonable to kill a portion of people. So, in my own opinion, from the perspective of the truly highest value of life, if we perhaps cull some of the lives in order to protect the lives of others, it is actually unreasonable. But if we look at it simply from a human perspective and perhaps see animals as a different species, then there are different viewpoints.
I'm a professor in the Center for Modern East Asian Studies. You just mentioned the serious disease of bird flu. Khenpo spoke about Buddhism as a religion concerning the mind and consciousness. At the same time, we also talked about the physical body. Everyone has a physical body and needs to stay away from illness. So what role does Buddhism play in preserving life and actively maintaining physical health?
Buddhism has actually quite clear views on the human body. When it comes to protection, there are two approaches. One is not very reasonable, methods of protection that don't conform to natural laws and morality. And there's another kind that very much conforms to natural laws and worldly morality. For everyone to protect their body, Buddhism also especially advocates this, especially in the Mahayana Sutras of Buddhism. It advocates how to sleep at night, how to eat during the day. All behaviors are explained in considerable detail, but Buddhism always emphasizes that your protection of your body should not be built upon the suffering of others or other beings. If it's built on the suffering of other beings, even if you protect yourself temporarily because there's a kind of karmic consequence, you might temporarily harm others to protect yourself, but through this reflection, at a certain time, you may not necessarily be very happy. So Buddhism has always believed that we need to protect our bodies in a very proper way that doesn't bring suffering to other lives. This kind of way to protect your body is very important. It seems you understand Mandarin, right? A little bit, right?
She understands a little bit. He figured you out. I want to ask a question. Let me give a few examples. We shouldn't harm others or other living beings, and in this way maintain our own bodies. Much medical or pharmaceutical research basically starts with animal experiments, which would not be allowed. But much of today's technology actually doesn't harm others. Because of modern technology, we can probably live longer and longer, 80 years old, 100 years old. But in the last 10, 20, 25 years, actually we're not living very comfortably because our bodies are getting weaker and weaker. This kind of reliance on technology that doesn't harm others, purely relying on technology to extend our lives, what would Buddhism's view be on this?
Nowadays, a lot of people really want to live a bit longer, but sometimes this life may depend on certain medical interventions. Of course, relying on medicine is also in many ways a form of science. If it does not cause harm to life or well-being, then from a Buddhist perspective, is it completely acceptable to rely on science to prolong life? That's hard to say. But if we take some health supplements, maybe they help prevent illness and help us get sick less often. In this way, we might live a little longer. This is something Buddhism would allow. Often, in many Buddhist prayers and blessings throughout history, may you live long, may you be free from illness, may you be happy. We often recite such heartfelt wishes in our sacred scriptures as well. But on the surface, science sometimes seems beneficial to us in the short term. For example, some medical treatments can help to relieve our temporary suffering to some extent. But in reality, when it comes to our lives as a whole, they can be directly harmful and have side effects. This includes things related to people's appearance nowadays. Many young people get cosmetic surgery, and after the surgery, it may look good on the surface for a while, but after some time there are adverse side effects that can affect various parts throughout the entire body. Many people don't live very long, so sometimes in certain situations you can't just look at the temporary benefits that high technology brings us. In fact, it destroys some of our fundamental structures.
I'm a teacher from Center for Modern East Asian Studies. I'd like to ask a rather naive question. In your presentation just now, especially at the beginning, you also emphasized that Western and Eastern religions actually have many common characteristics, some basic moral viewpoints. But even so, in what's called Western modern society, in these past 20 or 30 years, more and more people have begun to believe in Buddhism. Many celebrities. How do you explain this phenomenon? What I'd like to understand more is, what does Buddhism bring to Western society that Western religions don't have? Thank you.
I myself think that actually not only in the West but also in China this phenomenon exists. Previously, many elderly people believed in Buddhism, but now it's young people, especially those with quite high levels of education in society, including some celebrities and also many in the business world. I've also met many successful business people. Among these, I think about the reasons this way. I've also studied Western religions, but some religions are rather simple. They're just a simple ritual or a simple concept. You should visualize something, but they don't explain the reason for it, nor do they explain how it works. Apart from a history and stories, there may not be particularly strong persuasive power. And nowadays, especially young people, their pursuit of science and truth is very strong. If you just tell a story or perform a simple ritual, they may not accept it. In Buddhism, there are relatively few young people performing rituals, but there are quite many who study Buddhism. Why do many young people like Buddhism? Among them, a small portion may be personally moved or have a special enthusiasm, but quite many people are attracted to Buddhist philosophy, especially the philosophy of Tibetan Buddhism. Through long periods of mutual debate, continuously exploring sharp questions, finally arriving at very solid conclusions. This kind of theory is especially appealing to many young people now. Therefore they search, and Buddhism has particularly rich philosophy. Whether it's history or literature or in any area, they'll find it's not just a legend, not just a belief. Today I also told Professor Schneider that if our faith is just faith alone, it's very easy to deteriorate. But if it involves wisdom, this wisdom, whether in science or religion, cannot be denied. So this is a matter of truth. Many people here love philosophical exploration, right? Yesterday at the Max Planck Institute, I also said that many great masters of Tibetan Buddhism and many scholars in University of Göttingen should have a common way of thinking. Why? They are very rigorous. Those who study Buddhist logic are very rigorous. Even with a small question, they can dig it out, point it out, until you have nothing left to say. So just like many philosophers here, many people say that the philosophers here, because the weather outside is not good, they're cooped up inside every day. So they think things through, they say. I'm not quite sure about this. In Tibetan areas, the weather is also bad, so maybe there's something in common.
I'm a researcher in religious studies. The other is a substantive question. What is Buddhism's view of happiness? Why is it necessary to attain happiness by knowing about what happens after death? Why is it necessary to understand death? Happiness is an experience at a certain stage. This is Socrates' view of happiness. Another view holds that the moment of feeling pleasure is happiness. What happens afterwards doesn't matter.
This kind of view of happiness must also be discussed from Buddhism's perspective. Why? Because society nowadays is particularly concerned with happiness. As I just mentioned, I don't know what the situation is like here, but now, internationally, countless people want happiness. Every day is for attaining happiness, whether doing business or going to work. Much of it is to live happily themselves. But some people, because they don't know the meaning of human existence, plus they themselves are not satisfied with the wealth and status they possess. They want to keep rising, keep pursuing, and ultimately never reach a position that satisfies them. So I had to mention just now that using a Buddhist perspective, actually you should strive for what's worth striving for. It's worth the effort. But there's also no need to excessively pursue things beyond your capacity. That is very painful. So Buddhism's view on happiness, for example, myself, I have a sense of contentment in my daily life. But this contentment is not a kind of laziness or negativity. It should be through my striving and effort that I have a kind of satisfaction with things. Actually, what we call happiness is a kind of contentment in the human heart. That's what happiness is. And we also must talk about death, because everyone here will die. But when dying, many people are very frightened. There's no one who isn't afraid. Going to the hospital, if someone tells you you're going to die, except for very few individuals, probably everyone gets very nervous. If we in advance know what death really is, then we have a kind of preparation. It's like soldiers. They first have training. When they go to the battlefield, they'll have advanced preparation. But worldly people have no preparation at all for death and the afterlife. When they hear about death, a while ago in China, there was a 96-year-old elderly person. The doctor told him, "You probably won't make it." He got especially angry and immediately went to hit the doctor. He said, "Don't tell me inauspicious things. Actually, from Buddhism's perspective, all people must die, but this death is not an ending with this. It's the beginning of the next life. We see it this way, so we must talk about what people are concerned with, death and happiness. It's not that death is unhappiness or happiness is death. That's not what I mean."
Respected Khenpo Sodargye, hello. I'm a teacher from Anhui University in China, currently working as a language teacher at University of Göttingen. This semester I'm also teaching some literature courses. I myself am not a Buddhist, but I have many friends and family members who are very devout Buddhist believers. I myself usually listen to things like the Great Compassion Mantra and the Heart Sutra, and I feel each time it brings peace to my soul. So just now when you said Buddhism as a science of the mind for the 21st century, I very much agree with this statement. So my question is, as we enter the 21st century today, in its propagation and promotion, what kinds of challenges or opportunities will Buddhism face? For example, inevitably it must use modern language to interpret it. Inevitably it must rely on some high-tech communication devices. Nowadays, many scholars propose what's called an engaged approach. I want to ask, for Buddhism, especially for Tibetan Buddhism as a form of esoteric Buddhism, might this harm the authentic essence of Buddhism, or is this approach inappropriate? What kind of impact might it have? I'd very much like to hear your perspective on this. Thank you.
This is also an excellent question. For Buddhism, it actually needs to move with the times while also preserving traditional culture. It must keep pace with the present. Not only our Buddhism, every culture faces this challenge. Today I also asked Professor Schneider, I said, here in University of Göttingen, you maintain many buildings from over 100 years ago. Perhaps China doesn't even have this. Yet at the same time, you must face the Industrial Revolution, the Information Revolution. How do you balance these two? That's what I asked. For Buddhism, we indeed face the same challenge. But from my perspective, this is relatively manageable. Like certain specific traditions within Buddhism, for example, the monastic precepts, certain rituals for monastics, and in some Tibetan esoteric teachings, there are practices that need to be kept confidential. They can't be casually transmitted to others. Even if transmitted, others couldn't receive them properly. There are certain rituals and contents in sacred texts that I feel shouldn't be carelessly shared just because of openness. If we do that, it would be like classical architecture being completely destroyed. It would be like classical architecture being completely destroyed by modern high-rises, which would be such a pity. We especially hope to preserve Buddhism's original tradition in its authentic form. But because of this, does this mean we can't move with the times? Absolutely not, because it's a science of the mind, and Buddhism is vast and profound. Because it's a science of the mind, and Buddhism is vast and profound, it's not merely what people nowadays think, just a small culture confined to monasteries. Just a small culture confined to monasteries. It's not like that. Today I saw this library which has, I believe it was said, 8 million volumes. Our Buddhist texts, I've heard America also preserves many. In Tibetan areas, a single printing house also preserves an enormous collection of scriptures. Among these texts, some content can be shared publicly, while other content cannot. For the content that can be shared, I think with today's technology, especially in humanity's 21st century, You must connect with the internet, integrate with it. I heard that in China, this should be information from last year, now over 500 million people are online, living their lives on the internet. So according to one report, in the future world, any powerful culture will primarily exist online. Whoever can utilize online space, that culture will have a chance to survive. Once that opportunity is lost, it will fade away. So I believe now, including Tibetan Buddhism, Buddhism also shares information through the internet because it is completely a science of the mind, a very noble education for others. In any field in the East or West, it can be disseminated. And in the process of spreading, we don't need to fear it will be damaged. And in the process of spreading, we don't need to fear it will be damaged. However, certain rituals and practices are best not completely secularized. Nowadays, some humanistic Buddhism has become too worldly. It seems Buddhism's original flavor has completely changed. It's like demolishing a historic building and rebuilding a modern tower. On the surface, this tower looks beautiful, but in reality, all the original treasures are gone. So I believe both are important. Today, I also asked the professor, how do you balance these two aspects in architecture? For our Buddhism as well, I feel we must grasp both. If either one is lost, it would be a great pity.
I have another question regarding medical matters, specifically concerning Tibetan medicine. Can Tibetan medicine continue in this way, or must it adapt to the current environment? What is the current state of traditional Tibetan medicine in modernizing China?
Tibetan Buddhist medicine is truly remarkable. In Tibetan areas, we call the 5 vidyas, 5 sciences. And among these 5 sciences, medicine is one of the 5 major sciences. Up to the present day, Tibetan medicine has been very strict in maintaining traditional methods. Moreover, today's Tibetan medical innovators have also received many international awards. Within the scope of my knowledge, contemporary Tibetan medicine, whether in universities, in monasteries, or among the common people, is being transmitted beautifully. Its tradition has never been interrupted, although certain aspects of medicine, just like modern medicine, have been somewhat influenced. In its essence, it hasn't suffered any real damage, and not only in Tibetan areas, but now also in Han Chinese areas and in Western countries, it's very well received. And its therapeutic effects are quite good, without side effects.
Well, it's now approaching 4 o'clock. Thank you all for attending. Special thanks to Khenpo Sodargye for his lecture. I hope everyone has gained something valuable. Thank you very much. When you come again, we'll continue this conversation.
Certainly.